Well, thank you all for showing up today for this clinic on taking a cheap, in this case, zero cost model switcher and turning it into what I call backwoods critter. Now, shortly before I came on here, I decided, well, when people think of critters, what do they think of? And this is the first thing that pops up on a Google image search. Apparently there was some movie called Critters and multiple versions of it. Like it says, when you've got critters, you need all the help you can get. At any rate, this is the definition that we will use. And I like the part in particular, you'll know one when you see one, because they're very unique. Now, I got into this whole business of critters because I decided that, well, for me, the achievement program was something that allowed me to move step by step and learn new skills, which I hadn't really had. And I decided that I wanted to try to make my own engines. And if you want to go for the master builder motive power criterion, you need to Scratchbuild one. And then you have to have two others that can be made from kits as long as they're super detailed. And they all have to get the evaluators to give it a merit award, which is 80 some odd, 87 or something points. So I realized I was not going to ever be capable of making a steam engine with pistons and rods and so on like that. So I decided that I would start with more modest ones. And one of the, it's not this, the Critter isn't the first one I built, but I decided I needed to, and these are the points of the thinking process I went through, to think creatively and have a vision of what you might be able to do based on the tools at your hand or the model or the kit at your hand. And then, like they say, model railroading is fun. So exercise your creativity. One of the first sort of inspirations I had was a Conowingo models kit, which was built on top of the body of an AHM GE 35-ton switcher. And Chris Conowingo calls it the flatbed doodlebug, because although you can't quite see it, well, maybe you can, there's like a pickup truck bed at the back. And coincidentally, I discovered that our colleague Greg Cassidy actually made that model that Conowingo uses. And this is his very heavily weathered version of the model. And here are his photos of the model. You can see quite clearly that you have a power chassis underneath it, but everything else from the top up is his own creation. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner what happened when you strip away the body of the switcher. And it gives you all this glorious space. You don't have to worry about how you're going to power it. And there are lots of models of critters that are out there. I've run into a few in various types of searches. Here's one. This is actually the first model of motive power I made. It's a GE 23-ton switcher. This was a kit I got from San Juan Details. It has a simple DC motor that sits vertically inside the cab, and it goes down to gears and interacts with the wheel set. My problem when I eventually got the kit, which took months to arrive because they were apparently having supply chain issues, was that the instructions were, as we've often run into, sorely lacking in certain details that you need to have to make it. The wheel sets were not matched. They were not even HOS gauge. I had to force the wheels back and then cut the axles they were on, which were too long. But it was a good starting point for me to actually get it to work, to hook up the brush contacts and make the power system work. Here's another example of a critter that I ran across, another model. And as I say here, I think there's something about them that must appeal to many modelers. When it comes to prototypes, as the definition said, there's no clear understanding of what a critter is, but you'll know one when you see him. And I, just think of them as, there's not really a prototype. There's lots of inspiration for whatever you want to do as a modeler. This is a really bizarre one that I came across. I have no idea what its function is, although you could probably guess from the little hatches on it. This is the actual prototype of the 23-ton switcher that I built. It was interesting. It was used in the building of the Navajo Dam when they had to relocate tracks for the Denver and Rio Grande Western. So it was an industrial usage of moving things around. Now, here are some real doozies that I found online. The amazing variety of these critters is fascinating. I like this large one over here, which appears to have tires in addition to trucks. And then, of course, there's the smaller one. They're mostly industrial engines, like this one. The GE 23-ton switcher was not only used in the dam, Portland Cement had one at its factory, or two of them, I think, and other construction companies that did major projects had one. And this is really a wonderful vehicle. This is from New Zealand, and it was called a bush trolley. And you'll recall, I showed this to Matt Thompson a couple of years ago, and he ran a picture of it in his AP column, and we decided it'd be great to see if anybody wanted to try and duplicate it as a model. We didn't get any takers, apparently, or if you're out there and you built one, do let us know, because we'd love to see it. So here's how, like Greg and his AHM switcher, I started with this. It was a model power Porter Hustler. And when we had our joint meet with James River at Battlefield Baptist last November, up in the front of the main room, there was a large table with lots of gifts that had been brought, not gifts, but giveaway items. And at the end of the meet, people were invited to come up and just take whatever they wanted. And unfortunately, I was at one of the last tables, but fortunately, nobody had taken the model power Porter Hustler. So I snatched it up, figuring this is a good starting point. And it was quite easy for me to remove the body. And I looked at that, and there were in the very front, you see these two bits of plastic down here and in between the two larger objects. I cut those off the very front of the engine. They were simply plastic supports for the light bulb. And when I cut them away, because I looked at it and I said, now that's going to be a great flatbed area, like in a pickup truck, much like the Conowingo project. And I can use that for whatever purposes I wanted, which in my case, I was already thinking ahead. I was going to install a crane, a small crane. And when I looked at that body and saw that flatbed, I also was looking at this motor and thinking, what can I do with that? And I decided it looked like a chest. So having stripped everything away, I covered the chest with some scribe wood that I had. And I took larger beams and placed them around the chassis and smaller wood for floorboards across the back end. And I ended up putting a couple of filler pieces of wood on the sides where I had to cover a space for the wiring that came up from the chassis. And then I decided I, of course, had to build a cab of some sort. And from my bag of or box of Tichy windows and doors, I hauled out a window and a door and got some more of that scribe siding to make the sides of this thing. The corner posts were just used initially to set the thing in place, and I later took them off because they don't, you'll see later that they're not really necessary. And they had those horn hook couplers on it, which I had to, of course, take out. Now, in the process of doing this, I saved the wiring for the light. And there were some other wires in there that I thought I didn't need anymore. And unfortunately, knowing little about electricity, I cut them and realized later that it wouldn't run because I had cut the wires that went to the brush contacts in the chassis. So I had to spend some time reattaching them. At any rate, we managed to do it. And I cut a hole above the window so I could get that light bulb in place. And I found a little scrap piece of plastic that I used as a bulb holder, I guess you'd say, on the outside. And I had from a previous project, I had a fragment of a 3D printed roof that I had stretched tissue paper over and painted. And I put that on top, and a couple of Grant line smokestacks from some previous effort. And one of the things I really enjoyed taking was I have a tube of French hand cream, and it's a metal tube, a very pliable metal. And once that tube was used up, I decided to save the tube itself. And I've occasionally been parceling out pieces for various projects. And in this case, I decided to make the plow / bumper / cowcatcher out of it. I took some scrap I-beam and made sort of a frame for it before attaching it to the front of the engine. And in fact, I'm using the last little bit of that for another project right now. And then I went back and took some scrap styrene and made some hinges for the chest and a lock. See, I put little ladders to get up to the cab and on the back of the engine, and lots of hex bolt washers and nut bolt washers all around the engine. And I had to fill some gaps around the roof by adding some framing and added some additional hand grabs. And if you peer through the window to conceal the motor, I took a print. I went online and found a print of engine gauges and reduced it in size and cut it out. And then I installed it in between on the back of the motor so that it if you looked in through the window, you wouldn't see it. And I've done that. I did that on the GE 23 ton as well. And now we get to the good part in the back, where I had a Cache Creek. There was a guy out in California. His firm was called Cache Creek, and he made very small cars. And one of them was a little flat car that had a crane on it and a couple boxes. These are one truck cars. I mean, they're really like a scale 10 feet long. And I stripped off that crane. I thought about putting one of the T-sheet cranes on it, but I thought that was much too big. And so I ended up going with this little model, which I thought was just quite suitable. And I had found some other scrap pieces, ladders, air tanks or whatever that I stuck along the side. But for a lot of fun, I decided I would build a tool rack, which I had seen on some of those other critters. And I had these very fragile little toolkit from, as I recall, from GC Laser. And I decided I made a little rack for them and stuck the various tools in there after painting them. Just hung a couple of the saws off of hooks on the side, and then again the ladder. And then I decided to start, I had to think about putting a name on it, because a lot of these old engines had names. And we had our fourth grandson was born, the first to my daughter, up in Rhode Island last August. And they named him Emmett. And I decided, now that's a good name for this critter. And so I decided to put a name board up there. I've managed to, and I've encouraged others to do this. I've incorporated all of my family basically into my modeling on my layout, such as it is behind me, which hasn't received any attention for a couple of years. I have a mine that's named after my first grandchild, a creek named after the second one, and a wagon works named after the third one. So Emmett, as the fourth, had to get in the action. So he's very pleased, I'm told. I lettered it with, I've been getting my letters now just alphabet from company K and H or K and S. I don't remember, but it's alphabet. And my layout is technically the Eureka and South Pass Railroad. And I decided to number it number 3 to indicate it's one of the earliest engines on the layout. And I put, you know, lots of weathering on here. I've started using a lot of the AK streaking grime, rust, and pan pastels, which, you know, I used to use a lot of the dry Dr. Benz powders, but I still have them, lots of them. But I favor the pan pastels because there's no issue. You just put them down and they stick. And you can wash them a bit and get what you want out of them. And then I decided, an engine like this had to have some chain on it. Is an attractive thing, and I had some chain. I drove a mini spike into one of the posts there that support the roof and hung the chain from it. And then I found some other bric-a-brac and it was laying around. I think that's actually a box of dynamite in the foreground, just over the ladder and the hand grab, and an old rusty can, some other junk. And although this is not, this will take off like a Tesla, but you'll see it. So those are the little cars I was telling you about from Cache Creek. They're no longer being sold. We stopped making them. And that little bobber caboose at the back was, in the many years in which I was not railroading, I was still acquiring kits. That was an ye old Huff and Puff bobber kit that I believe that when I finally got around to making it, the price on the box was like $3.95. So that was it, pulling some wooden cars. Now, the AP evaluators did come out, they looked at it, and they did give the Critter a merit award. So that was 1 down to the 3 that you need. I want to remind everyone, we have a June 10th joint meet with the Chesapeake division coming up, and I'm going to be giving a clinic on this project. This was my Scratchbuild motive power entry. It was I decided to make a vertical boiler engine. In this case, I used Stanton powered wheel set, in which the wheel set itself is the motor, so that you don't have anything above the level of the body. And in this case, the hard challenge was trying to find the components that I would use. The water tank is actually a large silica container that you normally find in pills, to which I added some Micromark rivet, 3D rivet decals. The hose is made out of a strip of solder that I just put on top of it. The boiler is I cut off a relic of my cigar smoking days. It's the top, well, probably 1.5 inches of a metal cigar tube. And the diamond smokestack, my wife was throwing out some icing pipe tips. And I took 2 of them and put them together and trimmed them and put them together. And then I took an old faucet screen and put it on top as a spark arrestor. But we'll talk about that on June 10th. And that is a joint meet with James River, which will be held at the South Columbia Baptist Church in Columbia, Maryland on June 10th. There are going to be 5 clinics in all. Brian Sharon's going to be talking about backdrops. Martin Breckbeil is going to talk about taking old kits and old cars and things. He calls it trashed treasures, how to take these things and turn them into something useful. And James River, they have a guy that's going to be doing weathering with oils, and another on using AK weathering materials. So it'll be a good combination of events. So I didn't want to keep you. I don't like messing around. And if you've got anything you want to ask me or comment on, I'd be more than happy to entertain it. So thanks very much for listening. I did write an article about this critter in the January, February of this year. Local, the MER Local had an article about building my very own critter. Since I still have you, the June issue of the flyer is basically all done. It'll be coming out June 1st. And it is loaded with all sorts of, it's going to be about 57 pages long. We have our mini scenes challenge, meet the member, which is getting a lot of attention. We're going to profile Dale Latham. And since I mentioned him, we're also going to have a meet August 5th in Waldorf. And Dale is considering a clinic And he's also agreed to open his house to another layout tour that afternoon. So I was out there earlier this year, and it's another one of those fantastic layouts with lots of detail. But the details of that whole meet are being worked out. It's going to be held out at the firehouse in Waldorf. And our member colleague, Paul Hutchins, has organized that. And we'll probably be able to see his layout again as well when we meet there. So,
Alex, this is Greg. I do have a question.
Please.
When I built mine, I put a video on my YouTube channel last year. And one of the questions that I received, and it looks like yours was built the same way as mine, I was asked if I reversed the wiring so that when it went in the opposite direction, it was still going forward.
Yep.
And I replied that no, I didn't bother, because something like that, I don't mind running in reverse, and it's not going to get run very much anyway. So I didn't bother.
Well, it's funny. Initially, I had the same thing. I had to run it in reverse when I wanted it to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, because the wiring was so simple, that I decided to take the risk of swapping the poles. And lo and behold, it worked without any catastrophe on my part, which is what I fully expected.
Yeah, I think my level of electronic expertise, I could probably do something that simple. I wouldn't want to go much beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. All of these engines, in my case, are simple DC, because that will be, if I ever decided, and I'm not sure, I think I may just stop at this point, trying to advance my skill set. First of all, there would be, I just can't visualize, well, in this one, there might be room for, no, I just, there's just not enough space
For a decoder.
for the decoders and the wiring. Now on the Stanton drives, the instructions, there are two sets of wires that come out of the truck, the power truck, and each wire is there's actually two strands of wire on each side. In my case, I just kept those two together and hooked them up to lights.
Mm-hmm.
They work fine. But apparently you can separate them. And so you end up with a total of 4 wires, and they have a little diagram how you can attach it to, I'm not sure the right phrase, the harness or the decoder itself. The big difference I've found with the Stantons is, you have to add a lot of weight to the model that you're building. In the case, for example, of the vertical boiler, I took some 1/32 sheet lead, and I installed it. I scribed it like individual wood pieces, and tucked it underneath the frame before installing the Stanton drives. And then in the back, there's a wood bin, and I laid another strip of lead in there. I'm working on another project right now. This is actually another Conowingo Models kit.
Oh, the box cab.
The box bug.
Mm-hmm.
And this was originally designed to be built on top of the power chassis of a Bachmann 44-ton switcher. And I initially built it that way. And what happens is the way the Bachmann is constructed, basically that whole power area fills the entire body of this thing and has sufficient weight. And unfortunately, it had some other drawbacks. It makes the body sit way up high. So I decided I'd remotor it and use Stanton drives. which you can
Uh-huh.
see there. And that freed up the entire interior. I had to make a new base for it to install them. And then I could run the wires from the front truck up to the headlight that's on this.
Mhm.
And from the back truck on the sides, there are marker lights, green, green, red. So green front, green side, red to the back. And the marker lights required the addition of a bridge rectifier as well as 2 resistors.
Mhm.
And that exceeded some knowledge of my electronic capabilities. Particularly, I had to solder them all together, and I managed to do it. But when I set it on the track, it basically wouldn't move. So the inside of this body, I needed that space to add lead strips and little 1/4 ounce lead squares that I acquired from Amazon at some point. So it now runs quite nicely.
You had also mentioned on building yours that you had found that the Tishy train or the Tishy crane was too big to fit back there. And when I was building mine, I had a Tishy crane sitting in my junk box, and I pulled it out, and I agree, it's way too big. It's built for a dockside or something.
Yeah.
I found a guy online named Peach 3D Modeling. He's on Etsy, and he had a tiny little derrick that was just the right size, and that's what I ended up using on mine.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Well,
thank you. I enjoyed seeing how yours was built.
well, you were partially the inspiration on that, Greg. It's
I also see a couple of friends of mine have joined, Lee and Martin.
Oh, yes. I'm glad they finally made it. Yeah, we learn from each other, you know. And that's one of the great things I've found. It's sort of what Donald Rumsfeld used, the known unknowns, and then you don't know what you don't know. And so we always learn about new products and new sources. And it's wonderful when you get that information and you suddenly get a light bulb moment.
Yeah, and I enjoy going to clinics and learning more from them. I wish I could be up in Columbia on the 10th, but I'm going to be up in Harrisburg both days volunteering for new tracks. So it's unfortunate it's the same weekend.
Well, yeah, that happens. What can you do?